Hello and welcome to this IX Network video tutorial. Today we are going to cover the feature introduced in IX Network 6.0 called Resource Manager. A common pain point for testers is the lack of a collaboration function that would help them in building test configurations. Many times the expertise for different protocols and technologies lie within different members of a team. Implementing collaborative sharing of resources is an invaluable addition to a test tool. IX Network Resource Manager allows the most common test configuration elements of ports, protocols, and traffic to be shared among many users. They get quick access to the resources and are able to easily add them to their configurations using import, export, and merge with easy-to-use wizards. These elements help others to quickly build IX Network tests, create, share, and reuse any of the configuration elements. Once created, they can be saved to a commonly used revision control system, repurposed, or even emailed right from IX Network. Additionally, Resource Manager lets users edit and compare different versions of the same resource type. This diff functionality allows users to keep track of incremental changes to their resources and configurations. Okay, here's the agenda for this Resource Manager video tutorial. The first chapter in this video is going to talk about saving and importing ports. As you can see on the right hand side of the screen, when you do this with ports, the only thing you're saving and importing with ports is chassis, port, and layer 1 configuration. Now when you save protocols, you're saving the ports, the same port information plus the protocol information. So when you save protocols, you have to save both. And finally, in chapter 3, we're going to talk about saving traffic. When you're saving traffic, you're also going to save the protocol information because the protocols has the source and destination endpoints for that traffic and the ports that belong to that traffic. And then finally, in the last chapter, we're going to talk about other Resource Manager operations such as editing resources, comparing resources, and sharing resources. Okay, in this first chapter, we're going to talk about saving and importing port resources. So I have my IX Network configuration open. As you can see, a summary of this configuration is I have 4 ports in the test. I have protocols turned on 2 ports, BGP on port 1, OSPF on port 3. And for traffic, I have 2 traffic items, one going from BGP to IP from port 1 to port 2, and OSPF to IP from port 3 to port 4. So that's a summary, but the first thing I want to do is just save ports. The reason I might want to save ports as its own resource is because these 4 ports happen to be mine. They're my resource. They've been assigned to me, and I always want to pull them up every time I pull up an IX Network test. I just want to quickly grab my 4 ports that belong to me and go. So first of all, to get to the Resource Manager, you go to the Home tab, and then you click on Resource and say, I want to save a resource. Then you click on Ports, and I say, okay, I want to save all these 4 ports as they're my ports. I click on all 4 ports, I click Next, and I enter a name. John's Ports. Ports assigned to John only. Okay, and I hit Finish. And just like that, they're done. So I've saved my resource, and now I'm just going to close my configuration file and open up a new one and show you how to import them. Okay, now I have my new configuration file open. If I go to ports, I can see that I don't have any ports. But now when I go to my Resource Manager, actually, I don't have to go to my Resource Manager, but that's one way to open up a resource. But even better is from my Home tab, I can click on the drop down for Add Ports, and I see my 4 ports. So John's ports, the ports assigned to me, I just click on it. I say, okay, well, here's your 4 ports, John. Is that what you really want? I say, yes, it is, or I can unselect some of the ports if I wish and hit Finish. And what it's going to automatically do is pull those 4 ports in for me, copy any of the L1 configuration that I already had, and go ahead and reserve ports. So this is a very easy way to always know where your 4 ports are on the chassis. I don't have to look them up in the port manager or go searching through the right chassis. It just automatically connects to the chassis, and reserves all 4 ports. And that's it. Config applied successfully. And you can see now that I only have those 4 ports. I don't have any protocols. My BGP and my OSPF are not on. I've just saved and loaded my own port resource. So that's the way to do port saving and port importing. Okay, in this chapter we want to talk about Resource Manager when you're doing saving of protocols. Just to recap on the configuration, I have 4 physical ports in the config. I have 1 BGP peer on port 1, 1 OSPF peer on port 3, and for traffic, I have BGP going to IP from port 1 to port 2, and OSPF going to IP from port 3 to port 4. So coming back to the home page and clicking on Resource Manager, and this time we're going to save a resource of protocols. So first of all, let me expand everything so we can see what we're getting here. So I can see what I'm doing when I'm saving protocols. I get both protocol interfaces, that's also considered a protocol, as well as the protocols themselves. I can click on one of the upper boxes here like BGP, and it's going to save the exact config that I might want. Just BGP on port 1, of course, with the protocol interface. If I were to uncheck that, I can now say only save all protocol interfaces without any protocols, so that's also an option. And then again, if I click on BGP, if I want to not save the protocol interface, that's also an option. So in most cases, I'm probably going to want to save the BGP with the protocol interface and the BGP peers. If I have 1 peer or 1,000 peers, I'm going to save all of them with this. And I click Next. I'm going to say BGP on port 1 and finish. Okay, for importing purposes, I'm going to stick with my same config and show you what choices you have, because I think there's a few things for importing protocols that you need to see with a config that already has some stuff on it, like this one. So now I'm going to say, go over to Add Protocols. And I want to say I want to import that resource, BGP on port 1. So now I get the import screen, and let me expand the rest of that. And I have some choices. I can append this BGP to my existing configuration. If I hit Finish now and say Append, what it's going to say is I can't append that to the existing config because that existing config already has this same port name and the vport name. So it's just going to assign another offline port and add the config. As you can see, I have another BGP peer. It's got the exact same information for the neighbor, and even the route range is the exact same. So I've just appended that configuration to the existing configuration. And I'm actually going to delete this port to show you the other way to import this resource. Okay, the other way to import this resource is by manually mapping the resource. Now when I'm manually mapping a protocol resource, I can map it to any port I want instead of appending. For example, I know port 1 is the only port with BGP. I might want BGP to also go on port 4, so I can map it there. I can also select multiple ports and map that same resource there. So now I'm taking that same configuration from port 1 and assigning it to all the remainder ports. I just hit Finish. And in this case, it will not overwrite any of your layer 1 configuration because you're manually mapping it to those ports, so those ports will remain up. But now you can see I have BGP on all 4 ports. I've also have duplicate protocol interfaces. And as far as BGP goes, you can see on port 2, 3, and 4, I now have the same ranges. And I have additional peers and so on. So that's the way to import a protocol, either appending it to the configuration or to manually map it to one or more ports. Okay, in this example, I'd like to show how you save traffic resources and import them. So just to recap quickly the config, I have 4 ports in the configuration. As far as protocols, I have 1 BGP peer on port 1 and 1 OSPF peer on port 3. And for traffic, I have BGP going to IP from port 1 to port 2 and OSPF to IP from port 3 to port 4. So let's go ahead and save our traffic resource. Come back to Home, Resource Manager, Save. Click on Traffic, and let's just save our OSPF traffic. As you can see, it's also going to save the OSPF protocol, and it's showing that I'm going to save port 3 here. It's actually also going to save port 4, even though port 4 doesn't have any protocols. It's going to save port 4 because port 4 is included in this traffic item. So click Finish, and that will save. This time, I'm actually going to add 2 more ports to the configuration. And I'm going to manually map that traffic onto the 2 new ports. Okay, so now I can just, since I saved my resource, I can click on traffic and say add that OSPF traffic. And I can either append, which would actually add 2 more offline ports, and then put this configuration on there. I have an example of that in the previous chapter if you'd like to see how the append works. It's the same way. But I want to manually map them to show you how this works. So it says I have to map all ports. So I have to map both of these ports. So I'm going to go from port 3 to the newly created port 1/7 and port 4 to the newly created 1/8. And just like that. Now, unlike when I was doing the previous chapter with protocols, I cannot map multiple instances of port 3 and port 4 over to my right-hand side. So if I click, for example, 3 to 1, it's going to take 3 off of this port 1/7 and move it over to 1. So I need to. It's only it only goes just 1 pair. I can't map it more than once. I could probably run this wizard again and do it if I needed to. Okay, so click Finish, and we've just loaded the config. So let's check it out. If I go to protocol configuration now, I see that on my new port 1/7, I now have the OSPF copied from port 3. Protocol interfaces, I now have 2 new protocol interfaces, 1 and 2, are the same that were on the other 2 ports I copied from. A BGP, I should still have just the 1 peer because I didn't do anything with that. That's correct. And OSPF, now I have a duplicate peer from port 3 to port 1/7, as I would expect. Duplicate router IDs, duplicate interfaces, and duplicate route ranges. And then on the traffic item side, I also see I have a duplicate traffic item. Since it had the same name, it had to append something so you can see the difference. But that was basically a successful mapping of a resource of traffic from 2 ports onto 2 newly added ports. Okay, in this final chapter for Resource Manager, I'd like to tell you about some of the additional features that exist within Resource Manager. To quickly reiterate my config, I have 4 ports with port 1 having 1 BGP peer, port 3 having 1 OSPF peer. And for traffic, I have traffic going between BGP and IP on between port 1 and port 2, and OSPF to IP between port 3 and port 4. So within Resource Manager, we got to go back to the Home tab. If I open the resource repository, I can click on individual port resources, and I can see the John's port, my protocol resources. I happen to have 2, and traffic resources. So maybe you don't remember what's in there, or you want to look and possibly edit. So you could click on one of them and click Edit Resource. Now, Edit Resource is actually going to pull up a light version of the IX Network GUI in another window, and it's going to fully let you edit that resource with all the configuration that it has within that resource. Config applied successfully. I have my two ports from that traffic resource, port 3 and port 4. I can see I have 2 protocol interfaces. I still have my OSPF config, and I have my traffic item. I can rerun that traffic wizard if I want, make some changes. So I get a full-blown editor of all of the resources within that saved resource in this editor. Then I can close. Now I've just edited and modified that resource. Okay, so that's edit a resource. Now let's talk about comparing resources. So let's go to protocols. As you can see, I have BGP on port 1, and I have a BGP with changes, just for sake of this training video, on, as well. So I'm going to say compare, and then it's going to say which two files do I want to compare. I actually want to do BGP on port 1 on the left, and let's do the BGP with changes on the right, and say OK. And by default, we're showing everything. So if I were to look at my port configuration, my port attributes, here's my protocols, BGP. But let's just look at the differences for a shorter list. And I did make a change in BGP, and let's see if it shows up. So I can see that I've actually changed my route range from 5678 to 5555. So I can actually compare, and if I were to send this resource off to someone else, they were to make some changes and send it back, and I didn't know what the changes were that they made, I can always go into the resource compare feature and see the changes there. So that's another nice feature of Resource Manager. Okay, the delete option is fairly obvious. I can delete resources. I can look at all my resources with this button. I can see on the right here when they've been modified. And now we have save to disk. So in some cases, or in all cases, when these are all saved by default, they're saved in a personal file. So they're saved under documents and settings, my username, local settings, application data. So they're saved in my own config. So whenever I save a resource, it will automatically come up, and every time I launch a new IX Network config file, all my resources will be there. But I may want to save the resource to a network drive where everybody can collect the resource. So the save to disk just allows me to save any of my resources to another location, for example, a server, so other people can get to them. Or I can load a resource from somewhere else. And finally, we have send using email. Now when you click send using email, it will pull up your local client, and it'll copy the resource, which is an IX Network resource file, into the email, and then you can send that via email to someone. Add to current configuration just is basically like popping up the wizard to import it back into your configuration. That is the same option as if you were to click here and click on this, that's the same kind of import. One final note, if you want to change the default directory where all of your resources are saved, you can go into File Preferences and click down here, and again you can change this to a network drive, and if you change all of each user maybe on an application server to a network drive, then you can all save them as resources and share them between people much more easily that way, between QA people and engineers, and vice versa. Copy files back and forth and compare and save and share. And that's it. Thank you.